Every party swears the song will never end. The floor is crowded, champagne is flowing, and the band keeps playing louder to drown out the doubt. That was Wall Street in October 1929, 10 years of roaring headlines. A nation convinced prosperity had found a permanent address. Radios, automobiles, skyscrapers, a ticker tape that felt like a national scoreboard. Prices didn't simply rise, they glowed. Bankers nodded. Newspapers canonized a new era. The crowd grew and then grew careless and then grew deaf to any voice that didn't sound like victory. But a band hired on credit always has a fragile rhythm. And in one terrible week, the rhythm faltered, the tempo stumbled, and the music stopped. This isn't a story about a single moment of panic, as if fear suddenly descended like a storm. It is the anatomy of a structure built on leverage, rehearsed in optimism, and directed by rules that no headline could rewrite. The instrument most people played in 1929 was not stock, it was margin, borrowed money made to feel like a shortcut to wealth. 10% down bought 100% of a dream. A shop clerk could own a slice of United States steel, a school teacher could boast shares in Radio Corporation, and a retiree could feel wise simply because prices moved in the direction of approval. Broker loans piled up like stacked chairs backstage. Banks lent to brokers, brokers lent to customers, corporations lent to each other, and collateral for these loans was the very thing being inflated by the loans. Optimism didn't cause fragility. Borrowing did. Leverage works like a magnifying glass for both gain and loss. It warms profits into fires and turns ordinary drawdowns into conflagrations. When enough participants borrow to buy the same asset, the market itself becomes a margin account. The true price at any moment is not only what buyers and sellers believe an asset is worth, it is what borrowers can afford to hold when the lenders knock on the door. Nothing in that sentence requires fear to be true. It only requires arithmetic. By late summer, the drumbeat changed pitch. Industrial production wobbled. Earnings from marquee companies missed expectations dressed as inevitabilities. A few sober analysts whispered about valuations, and brokers, without ceremony, tightened terms. Collateral haircuts widened, call money rates ticked upward. The smallest technical adjustments, the kind that never make front pages, matter immensely when a nation is balancing on borrowed stilts. Markets can ignore bad news for months until the weakest hands, pressed by math, can't ignore anything at all. Then the news isn't the headline. The news is the selling it triggers. Thursday, October 24th, opened to a wall of sell orders. The tape lagged minutes behind the floor. Phones rang hot with instructions to liquidate. Prices slipped, then slid, then skidded as margin calls ricocheted through accounts like a chain letter. One forced sale begets lower prices, which beget more calls, which beget more forced sales. That is not panic. That is a positive feedback loop where the positivity belongs to gravity. A handful of financial titans, sensing theater as much as risk, walked onto the stage and placed conspicuous bids and marquee names. Confidence surged for an hour. The floor steadied like a nervous crowd soothed by a song it recognized. But confidence is a candle in a drafty hall. The draft was not fear. The draft was debt. Friday brought a strained calm. Calm after a panic is not peace. It is stunned silence. Broker back offices worked through the weekend reconciling accounts. Clerks typed letters no one wanted to open. Households that had never missed a utility bill encountered a quieter threat. The requirement to produce cash, they did not have to hold assets they did not fully own. Saturday papers assured readers that fundamentals are sound, that captains of finance stood shoulder to shoulder, that buyers had stepped in. The public heard reassurance. The market heard conditions, soothing stories fighting the unromantic arithmetic of loans that still needed to be met. A margin call is not a debate. It is a deadline. Monday, October 28th, the bids were thin, not absent, thin. Enough to catch a few sellers at insulting levels, not enough to support an avalanche. Prices fell through pockets of air. Stop orders turned out to be wishes stapled to tickets. Each dollar decline undermined the value of collateral, which invited more calls, which demanded more selling. The closing bell did not ring in a new era. It closed a day in which the latter broke a rung at a time. Then Tuesday arrived, and the floor remembered what muscle memory always prescribes when the exits feel smaller than the crowd. Sell first, price later. Volume detonated. Prints stepped down through levels that editors had written about for months as impossibly low. Brokers barked equity thresholds. Customers pleaded for time. Time itself shrank. Liquidation replaced trading. The music didn't quiet. It cut. The stage that looked like oak was a trap door, and below it was a staircase without railings. The mechanism deserves to be plain. Most customers' stock purchases sat on margin with brokers. Those brokers financed customer loans with call money borrowed from banks and trusts, payable on demand. When banks called their loans, brokers needed cash immediately. Their only rapid source was customers, who then had to meet margin calls or be sold out. The same asset people used as collateral was the asset they had to sell to meet the new collateral requirements. That is the collateral spiral. Falling prices force sales, sales push prices down, and down invites more forced sales. Liquidity, so abundant the week before, proved to be a fair weather friend. It exists when it is not needed and vanishes when it is. The most widely held, best-loved names often fall the fastest in an unwind. Their prices are not simply reflections of belief, they are reservoirs of borrowing. When the reservoir drains, it drains everywhere at once. Commentators later called the episode a panic, as if emotion drove the bus. What drove the bus was plumbing. Fear lights the fuse. Leverage carries the blast. A crash is an event. Depression is a process. The week the music stopped was the overture, not the final movement. Bank failures followed in untidy waves, each revealing loans that only made sense at prices that no longer existed. Credit contracted. Businesses postponed orders. Inventories piled up like unsold tickets. Unemployment metastasized from statistics to daily ritual. Policy sometimes aimed correctly and sometimes brought a bucket of sand to a burning theater. Tight money arrived when relief was called for. Tariffs strangled international trade as if the economy could be insulated without suffocating it. Public reassurances, earnest as they were, sounded like lullabies over sirens. A deleveraging can't be cured by hope. Borrowed demand is not free. When the borrowing stops, prices that were the child of that borrowing must accept colder parentage. The very collateral that once certified safety becomes the reason to sell. The system does not conspire, it obeys physics. Behind the indices and headline numbers, the ledger of real lives tells the story in smaller print. Small investors, clerks, teachers, shopkeepers learned the true meaning of on margin. When a letter arrived, using polite words to describe a blunt reality, positions liquidated, balance due. A family that had believed the market was a kind of bank discovered that a portfolio can be both valuable and non-negotiable when someone else controls the timing. The contrast is simple. Owners choose when to sell, borrowers are chosen for. Yet there were others keeping calmer lists, those who had cash or short-term claims, those who held unencumbered assets, those who arranged their lives so no forced sale could be demanded. All found themselves in rare company. They didn't have to be smarter or braver, they only had to be solvent. History records crises with a ruthless pen. It notices who had money when others needed it, and it records the transfers accordingly. If the notes of this song sound familiar, it isn't imagination. Markets recycle melodies with new instruments. There's always an alleged reason why a given cycle is different. A technological revolution, a new monetary regime, a sophisticated risk model that claims to have replaced weather with climate control. The language changes, the math doesn't. A recognizable progression repeats. Credit expands and validates prior optimism. Rising prices justify further credit. A shock tests the weakest hands. Lenders tighten, collateral shrinks. Forced sales beget lower prices, beget more forced sales. And after the crescendo, silence. The question hiding in plain sight is uncomfortable. Do bad headlines break markets, or does the leverage humming under the market turn any headline into a wrecking ball? Answers aren't found in speeches. They are found in loan agreements. The practical lessons are not complicated. Leverage is the villain. Borrowing converts volatility into insolvency. If selling can be forced, selling will be forced. Liquidity is not a right. It is a mood that deserts the needy first. Collateral is not cash, especially when the collateral is the same asset being purchased. Diversification does not rescue overborrowing. Owning many things on margin is simply many ways to become a compelled seller. Solvency is strategy, not a footnote. The decisive edge at the bottom belongs to those who can refrain from selling, and to those who can buy when others must. Narratives intoxicate, legal terms adjudicate. Headlines cheer the boom and soothe the slide. The margin clerk has the only voice that matters when the band stops. Consider the floor itself, not as a legend, but as a workplace. Pre-opening overnight calls go out. Some accounts wire funds. Others request patience that math cannot grant. Brokers press orders, aware that the first prints will establish a slope for the day. The opening rotation arrives, and offers drop into thin bids. The second layer of buying interest sits lower and smaller. Floor brokers shout size the book cannot hold. A handful of marquee shares receive symbolic bids from organized pools, enough to signal order without supplying it. Midday, equity thresholds are recalculated, the innocuous way a hurricane recalculates a coastline. An account at 20% equity at noon can be at 12% by 1:00 clock and under 8 by 2. Not because of recklessness, but because prices moved. Calls go out again. Phone lines clog with echoes. In the last hour, funds promising daily liquidity must meet redemptions, and managers who vowed to wait for a bounce discover that bounces do not arrive on schedule. Closing prints are not price discovery, they are price confession. The institutional cast plays predictable parts. Banks and trusts are the brass section, bold in sunlight, muted at dusk, whose call money desks can turn a bright tune into a minor key with a single repay. And brokerages supply the percussion, keeping time with margin rules that speed the dance precisely when restraint is needed most. The exchange is the stage manager, clearing trades, calming the crowd, insisting the set is sturdy while quietly patching papier-mâché. The public is the chorus, immense in number, modest in volume individually, capable of lifting a refrain into mania and drowning it a week later. No heroes or villains are required in this script, just a cast obeying instructions written in leverage. It is tempting to attribute the silence that followed to fear, to blame psychology for physics, but the core is an accounting identity. When asset values rise far above the cash that actually supports them, the distance is made of belief backed by credit. Remove belief or withdraw credit, and price must fall until the remaining cash can carry what remains. The new era of the late 1920s, stripped of its sequins, was believed printed on leverage and priced as permanence. Redemption came in a week. After the music stops, the question is what survives. Cash survives. Short-term high-quality claims survive. Unencumbered assets survive. Skills survive. The ability to create value without renting someone else's balance sheet. Patience survives. The willingness to wait while others unwind and to act. When compulsion, not prophecy, sets prices, the orchestra will always return. Lights will blaze again. A new instrument will be introduced, freshly engineered to make the old mistakes feel modern. Cycles do not request permission. They only check leverage. There is a human range in all of this that numbers miss. Scattered across cities, a generation carried the memory of a week when loud optimism couldn't make a market. When important men arrived to steady the floor and discovered that money borrowed is money owed, and money owed goes to the front of the line. The lesson is stern but not cruel. Markets do not punish hope. They punish mismatches between promises and cash. Borrowed prosperity feels like a gift from the future. The invoice always arrives. In the months that followed, stories circulated about fortunes saved by prudence and fortunes built by patience, about businesses purchased from receivers at prices that later generations would call impossible, about neighborhoods reshaped by those who held liquidity while others held claims. In every retelling, the moral hides in the same corner. Possession of cash when the crowd needs it is not merely comfort, it is power. That dynamic is not a trait of a single age. It is the grammar of credit. A final picture clarifies the metaphor. A ballroom at full tilt, chandeliers throwing light across a floor crowded with borrowed dancers. The orchestra is brilliant, the rhythm relentless. Near the exits stand a few who are listening not to the melody, but to the mechanics, the conductor glancing at the clock, the manager counting tickets, the thinness of the board where a column should be. When the tempo shifts, those near the exits don't rush. They simply move while others hesitate. Outside, the air is cold and honest. Inside, surprise spreads. The song ends as all songs must. The difference between drama and inconvenience is leverage. The labels Black Thursday, Black Monday, and Black Tuesday make the week sound like weather, as if a front arrived uninvited. But the climate here is made by credit, and the storm forms long before the rain. The days got names because the decade got careless. The bill for borrowing the future often arrives all at once. Markets will sing again. That is certain. The practical question is location when the tempo changes. On the center of the floor or near the exit, the answer decides who becomes a forced seller, who remains an owner, and who, in the hush that follows, finds value scattered like sheet music on a stage that looked like oak and turned out to be a door. History's refrain is steady. Credit expands, and the crowd believes. Leverage accumulates, and the floor feels bigger than it is. A few missteps reveal how narrow the stage always was. Then comes a week when the notes don't land, when margin clerks speak louder than maestros, and when arithmetic claims precedence over applause. In 1929, that week arrived. The lesson wasn't delivered in whispers. It came as silence. And in that silence, the rules that endure stood out with brutal clarity. Own what cannot be called away. Borrow with suspicion. Keep cash for the day the crowd forgets where the exits are. And remember that a market is a place where promises are priced until the day they are not.